In nature, high-purity metallic copper hardly exists. It usually coexists with various elements such as iron and sulfur in ores. So how is high-purity copper refined? The first thing to do is to go through this giant drilling machine. In the rocky surface, make several holes more than 15 meters deep. Chemical high explosives were injected mechanically, and then the electronic detonation device was manually arranged. After an overwhelming explosion, the solid ore was disintegrated as much as possible. Then it was the turn of the giant mining car, which had a capacity of more than 80 tons of ore. However, the copper content of the ore is extremely low, less than 0.5%. So we're going to talk about dilute sulfuric acid solution extraction. First, workers spray a dilute sulfuric acid solution on the ore. After a few months, the sulfuric acid will flow out with copper, which is a copper sulfate solution. At this time, the copper sulfate was already impatient, and it came to the factory through the diversion tank and the water pump. Workers add an acidic solution to it, which increases its concentration and makes it more conductive, which then flows into the electrolyzer. There's a lot of cathode plates in there, and despite that, they're just a thin layer now. After about 10 days of adsorption, the thickness of each piece will increase to 2.5 centimeters, weighing 125 kilograms, and the purity will reach 99.99%. And it's the purity at which you can make electronics. Now, let's look at another extraction method. It's a lot more complicated. First, the copper ore is crushed into smaller stones by this giant miner. After all the ore is ground, workers add chemicals to it and form a mixed mud with the bubbles. They will flow into the flotation tank, and then the blower will blow up bubbles, which will absorb copper molecules, drive copper molecules to float up and overflow the flotation tank. After filtering the spilled solution, a copper mountain was obtained with 25% to 30% copper content. Workers would take it by rail car to the refinery for further refining. First, the copper ore is mixed with thin sand by machinery. Silica sand plays a role in melting and purification during copper smelting. In a high-temperature furnace, silica sand absorbs other unwanted substances such as iron and floats up to form slag, while copper sinks due to gravity. Now the purity of copper has reached 60%. Then, workers used a special crane to pour the copper into another furnace, using the same method to increase the purity of the copper to more than 94%. And what you see here is what looks like lava billowing down, which is the residue from refining. Due to the perennial dumping, there is an apocalyptic scene here. Now back inside the refinery, where the last refining is taking place. After this refining, the purity of the copper liquid will directly reach 99.4%. The refined copper liquid is poured into the long-awaited rotating mold, and after cooling, the copper liquid will form a special shape, which is the anode plate. Next, the machine will eject the anode plate and send it to the cleaning machine by the conveyor for cleaning. This is to clean off the anti-stick substance that is contaminated with the mold when the copper liquid flows into the mold. These anode copper plates are then sent to an electrolysis plant several kilometers away for electrolysis. They will be sent to a large continuous cell, and after the cell is connected to the current, the excess impurities will sink to the bottom of the cell. The high-purity copper will gradually adhere from the anode plate to the cathode plate on the other side. So far, we have a high-purity copper of 99.99% purity. It's then redissolved, and the molten copper flows down to the bottom of the furnace through an insulating metal channel. This channel allows them to remain in a liquid state for a longer time, with the purpose of facilitating the better flow of copper liquid into the mold. After being cooled and removed from the mold, they will form a rectangular copper block about 6 meters long. Now, you can cut it into the specifications required by the customer. Paste the factory logo and it can be sent to the manufacturer. The manufacturer will heat the copper blocks to increase plasticity and make them into rectangular copper bars 1 centimeter thick. Using multiple rollers with grooves, they will be rolled in multiple stages to turn the rectangular copper bars into a circle and greatly reduce the diameter of the copper bars. Finally, they will become 6 millimeters thick copper bars. And when they're finished, they're wound up in a coil shape, layer by layer, into a press. The pressing machine applies pressure to the coil. In this way, the density of the coil can be maximized to reduce the space occupied during transportation. At this point, the manufacturing process is completely over. This is the Jiahao Encyclopedia. Friends who like it can follow me.